So before I start this video, I just wanted to mention that there will be spoilers for Mario & Luigi Brothership, so if you haven't finished the game yet, be warned. But let's go ahead and start. So there are a few misconceptions that I am a bit annoyed about in the Mario fanbase because there is so much evidence disproving them, like Paper Mario not being canon, Miyamoto hating stories and being responsible for the restrictions in Paper Mario, or Toad in Super Mario Bros. 2 in 3D World being the blue Toad from New Super Mario Bros. Wii rather than the main Toad. But this recent misconception is more relevant. I mean, I guess it's not necessarily a recent misconception, but it has been kind of brought up more lately because of Brothership not having Bowser as the final boss, but Reclusa instead. And that is the fact that a lot of people are saying that Bowser is the final boss of every Mario & Luigi game prior to the Brothership, which technically isn't true. And this is used to be like a negative point towards the end of Brothership, which is just kind of weird, considering the fact that Mario RPGs should be breaking the norms and should be doing something different, and the fact that it is so refreshing seeing a villain that's really interesting other than Bowser. So, yeah, like, this is a misconception, because saying that Bowser is the final boss is a completely different statement than saying that Bowser is involved with the final boss of every Mario & Luigi game, because technically that second point is correct, because Bowser technically is involved with the final boss in some way, but you're not fighting him every time, or it isn't a part of the main final boss every time. So hear how he isn't the final boss of every game. With Superstar Saga, sure, you could make the point that Bowser is technically in the final boss and you are technically fighting a form of Bowser, but at the same time, you are more so fighting Cackletta, who's possessed Bowser's body, and it's on a kind of on a more in-depth level than something like the black paint possessing Bowser in Color Splash, because you actually clearly do see that there is a character possessing Bowser here. And the final phase of the fight doesn't even involve Bowser, which is just kind of interesting. You're more so fighting Cackletta's soul. So, when looking at it that way, it's more of a technicality that you're fighting Bowser, and that point of it being a technicality will definitely come into play a little more later in this video. But moving on to Partners in Time, the part where you do fight Bowser at the end isn't really a part of the final boss. I think it's kind of disingenuous to even call that the game's final boss, because of how crazy and involved the actual final boss of Princess Frube is in the game. The part where you fight Bowser, and I guess by extension Princess Frube's soul, is kind of a fight that was shoehorned in. It isn't really a boss fight, because you don't even attack. It's more of a glorified minigame that uses the battle mechanics of Partners in Time, because you have to counter Bowser's attacks and things. So I don't even know why people consider that Partners in Time's final boss, because it is not a final boss. It is more like, okay, here's what it's comparable to. It's like the finishing move. Kind of like how when Bowser is doing like the finishing blows on Dark Bowser and Bowser's Inside Story. Or in Brothership, how at the very end of the final boss, you charge up Mario & Luigi's hammer attacks, like through this bonding move to like hit Reclusa multiple times, which isn't really a part of the final boss. That's more of like a quick time event. So this really shouldn't be considered a part of the final boss. But let's say you do. Let's say you consider that Bowser being the final boss of Partners in Time. Okay, sure, fair. But Bowser's Inside Story, you really can't make that argument, because you don't even fight Bowser at all. You fight as Bowser, which is not the same as fighting Bowser. That's kind of going back to my point of Bowser being the final boss or being involved with the final boss. And Dark Bowser isn't Bowser. Almost Bowser means it wasn't Bowser. Dark Bowser is the Dark Star taking on the form of Bowser, so you're really just fighting the Dark Star, kind of having Bowser's abilities in form and everything. That isn't the same as fighting Bowser directly. It's not the same thing as fighting something like like, I guess on a point with like Dream Team coming up, like Dreamy Bowser or Dry Bowser or any of Bowser's other forms. Dark Bowser is not a form of Bowser, it's a form of the Dark Star. That's like saying that Mario is the boss of Chapter 4 of Thousand Year Door, when it's not. It's Dupless, who took on the form of Mario. So you really can't make that point that Bowser is the final boss of the game, because it's the Dark Star that's the final boss of the game. And again, like, people would be using that as a technicality, and we'll get into that point in a little bit. So that leaves us with only 2 games prior to Brothership that Bowser willingly fights you as the final boss of the game. Like with Dream Team, Dreamy Bowser, and then Paper Jam, Shiny Robo Bowser. Those are the only 2 times in the series where Bowser is willingly fighting Mario and Luigi as the final boss. Not possessed, not something that is taking on the form of Bowser, or not something that's shoehorned in at the very end of the game. Those are the only 2 games where you could definitively say that you're fighting Bowser. So, yeah, I feel like that is kind of misleading to say that he's the final boss of every game. And like I said, like with my point of Bowser being involved with the final boss, yes, that is true. He technically is involved with the final boss of every game. However, at that point, you can't really discredit Brothership for that, because he does appear during the final boss of Brothership. So, like, I think it's just kind of weird at that point. Like, you'd be arguing, like, how much of a role Bowser has in, like, previous Mario and Luigi final bosses. I guess it becomes more vague when you kind of when you're looking at it in the sense of Bowser being involved with the final boss, because you could technically say that he is in Brothership. Actually, at one point, like, technically right before the final boss, which I guess is within territory of calling it the final boss, because people count the Shrouzer thing shoehorned in at the end of Partners in Time as the final boss. You could technically count Bowser unwillingly saving Mario and Luigi right before you fight Reclusa, so I would definitely count that as Bowser being involved with the final boss, because that's kind of going into that whole sequence and everything. So yeah, I really don't see the point in arguing how it's weird that Brothership doesn't maintain the tradition, because it's weird. It's not really a tradition at all. Why is it even considered breaking a tradition in the first place? Like, the Mario RPGs have always been known for having wacky villains and doing things that are out of the ordinary for the Mario franchise. So I think it's a bit weird that people think that the Mario and Luigi series needs to have Bowser as the final boss for every game, like it's some kind of obligation. Like, I don't see people arguing that Bowser needs to be the final boss of every 3D Mario game, even though he has been the final boss for every 3D Mario game. Like, I see a lot of people saying that it would be cool to have an original villain in, like, a 3D Mario game. So I think it's weird that people are saying that it's somehow a tradition that the Mario and Luigi series has Bowser, like, as the final boss, or that Bowser needs to be the final boss of every Mario and Luigi game. And the thing is, like I've been saying, it wasn't really a tradition that he appears in the boss. It's more so a coincidence due to all of the technicalities of him being involved with every final boss. That's what I was saying, like Superstar Saga, it's a technicality that he's there in the final boss, because it's more so Cackletta. Partners in Time, he was kind of shoehorned in, which is another technicality. Then Dark Bowser, that is another technicality, and at that point, that isn't even Bowser. So, if you're hinging this tradition on all of these technicalities of Bowser somehow being in the final boss of every Mario and Luigi game, then it really isn't a tradition at that point. So Brothership didn't really have an obligation to have Bowser as the final boss. And even if it was some kind of tradition, is Bowser not being the final boss really that big of a deal anyway? Mario RPGs have been having unique and interesting villains as the final boss since the original game. And Super Mario RPG had a lot of people from the Mario and Luigi series, that were involved with that game originally. So it's like Mario and Luigi having like a new or original boss doesn't really break any conventions or breaks any traditions that were involved with the Mario and Luigi series. And the thing is, the Mario and Luigi series has more interesting traditions anyway, so I don't know what's even the point of sticking with the one that of like Bowser being the final boss. That's like the most boring thing you can consider as a tradition for the Mario and Luigi series. Like, another one that actually involves Bowser that is actually interesting is the fact that Bowser has a different form in each game. Like you could say in Superstar Saga, it's Bowletta, then Partners in Time, Trowser, and technically you could say Baby Bowser is there as well. And then Bowser's Inside Story, if you're not counting Dark Bowser, you could say that Giant Bowser is another form that Bowser takes on in the game. And then Dream Team, you have Dreamy Bowser, Paper Jam, Shiny Robo Bowser, and also Paper Bowser for a similar reason to Baby Bowser. And then Brothership, you have Gloam Bowser. So Brothership technically maintains that tradition of every game having some form of Bowser variation. Though there is a couple that Brothership doesn't have, like the Wiggler boss, so I'm sorry Wiggler bros about that. But there are much more interesting Mario and Luigi tropes and traditions that are worth talking about, rather than Bowser being the final boss. But yeah, that is just my take on it. I just think it's a bit weird that I know, like, some people in the comments are maybe saying, nobody has a problem with Bowser not being the final boss. But I have seen a decent amount of people say that, for some reason. But yeah, so anyways, thank you guys for watching this video. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more, and make sure to check out my Discord server and Blue Sky if you want to. Goodbye.